Temperatures into the mid or high single figures. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, a milder night to come because of the additional cloud that comes in from the Atlantic once again. And this is a weak weather front once more, so we're going to see outbreaks of mostly light rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Things do brighten up into the afternoon for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some bright spells start to come through, but for England and Wales, really, that's where the finest conditions will be through the weekend. Plenty of warm, sunny spells.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Sir Flip-Flop-a-Lot has added another flip-flop to his collection as the Labour leader vows to reopen the Brexit deal after succumbing to corporate pressure and promising closer ties with the unelected Eurocrats. Boris Johnson once said he has more flip-flops than Bournemouth Beach, and as you can see from the pictures on the screen, that's a lot of flip-flops. A number of Sadiq Khan's potential competitors have vowed to scrap his controversial ULEZ scheme. Who will free the people from his tyranny? And is obesity costing the NHS too much? Well, Pavarotti once said the reason fat people are happy is that the nerves are well protected. Perhaps we're being too hard on them. Plus, one for the unemployed, wanted, job at Glasgow City Council, but not if you're white. A feisty Geordie who incidentally doesn't like PG Woodhouse will be joining me on that shortly. State of the Nation starts now. Well, We'll also be joined by a cheerful panel today, the historian Dr David Starkey, who seems to get himself in newspapers even more than I do, and the former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important in the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.uk. But now, here to revivify your knowledge of the latest headlines is Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. The top stories this evening. Rishi Sunak and his Japanese counterpart have discussed further potential cooperation on military training and exercising. The two countries signed a new agreement to build closer defence, security and cyber ties. The Prime Minister is in Hiroshima, where he attended a ceremonial dinner ahead of the G7 summit. Rishi Sunak saying the new deal will further strengthen and deepen the partnership between the two countries. And earlier, he announced Japanese businesses have promised to invest almost £18 billion in the UK. The Prime Minister describing that as a massive vote of confidence in the British economy. Now, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has revealed Storm Shadow missiles recently sent to Ukraine by the UK have been used in the heat of battle. Ben Wallace and his Norwegian counterpart signed an agreement to increase the ability to detect submarines, mine threats and security in the North Atlantic. The accord comes a year after the attack on the Nord Stream gas pipeline. Ben Wallace said he had no doubt Russia had the intent and ability to target underwater energy and communication lines.
We've seen, even last week and the week before, the Russian Navy come down through between our two countries into the North Sea, and obviously the range of hulls that the Russians sometimes deploy range from spy ships to surface ships to submarines, and that means we have to work together as NATO partners, some of the oldest NATO partners together, to make sure that we protect that northern flank.
Earlier today. Now, the RMT union announced this afternoon that fresh strike action next month will take place, with a total of 20,000 railway workers walking off their jobs. Members from 14 train companies, including caterers, train managers and station staff, will all take action on June the 2nd, affecting train services throughout the country. It's all part of their long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. The RMT General Secretary, Mick Lynch, says the government is once again not allowing the rail delivery group to make an improved pay offer that they can consider. And that news comes as the National Education Union announced this afternoon as well that teachers will hold further strikes in July if their long-running dispute over pay hasn't been resolved by mid-June. Now, Environment Agency figures showed there were over 300,000 sewage spills in England last year. That's an average of more than 800 every day. Water companies have pledged £10 billion to overhaul the system. Water UK has said the money will be paid up front by investors, but then drawn back from consumers by gradually raising their bills over decades. Water company bosses have apologised for failing to tackle the spills of raw sewage in rivers and on beaches. And lastly, the government's revealed it spent almost £162 million on the Queen's state funeral and related events. The Treasury says that figure includes security during the period of national mourning, which saw Queen Elizabeth lying in state at London's Westminster Hall. Her Majesty's coffin was also on public display at Edinburgh Cathedral. Those are your latest news headlines. You are up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GBNews, Britain's news channel.
Sir Keir Starmer of the second referendum has vowed to reopen the Brexit deal to have a, quote, closer relationship with Brussels. Sir Keir gives flip-flops a bad name, not that I wear them personally, but leaving that to one side. He has more flip-flops than the Bournemouth beach, as Boris Johnson once said. Sir Keir, until Boris Johnson's landslide electoral win, wanted you, the British public, to vote for Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister. Now he's expelled the self-same Jeremy Corbyn from the party. He got into terrible confusions as to whether or not Jeremy Corbyn was a friend of his. One time he said he was, another time he said he'd never been a friend. Sir Keir told us, as leader of the Labour Party, he would argue for the return of free movement within the EU. He then ruled out the idea of free movement within the EU as a red line if the party ever came to power. He knelt to the Black Lives Matter mob and then referred to it as a mere moment, dismissing the idea of defunding the police. Sir Keir was once against the government decision to strip Shamima Begum of her British citizenship. He then subsequently backed the Special Immigration Appeals Commission decision to take away Shamima Begum's citizenship. Odds fish. And finally, in a flip-flop and then flip again, Sir Keir wanted your vote for a government that would hold a second referendum. Then he said he wouldn't pursue a second referendum, and now he wants to reopen the Brexit deal. It is hard to know what Sir Keir believes in when, as Rod Liddell once brilliantly said, he seems to live in a holiday inn on the road to Damascus. But of course, I want to know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. I'm delighted now to be joined by my panel, the historian Dr. David Starkey and the former Labour advisor Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, I'll give you the first word on this.
I thought you would.
Politicians inevitably change their minds, and the idea that something you said 20 years ago must be hung around your neck forever is absurd, and some evolution of policy is a sign of wisdom rather than of weakness. On the other hand, there's such a litany of flip-flops.
I think actually this is really, really unfair. And I think what's important is Keir, since he was Brexit Secretary, actually, always felt, or Shadow Brexit Secretary, I should say, always felt that he could do a better deal with the EU, that actually that's what we needed. And then he was persuaded, right, because that was Labour Party policy, to go for a second referendum. So he obeyed party policy, he was in the shadow cabinet. So he argued for that. But actually, what I cannot believe... Hold on. What I cannot believe at the moment is this fuss about him saying, I want a better deal. We have got a terrible deal, right?
But when you say he was persuaded for a second referendum and had to go along with it for collective responsibility, he was the shadow Brexit secretary. I get collective responsibility. I've just made it clear. I always thought voter ID was a bad idea. When I was bound by collective responsibility, I went along with it. But I wasn't the minister in charge. If you're the shadow minister in charge, it's your policy. So then changing it is your policy when you're leader.
No, because actually it was Labour Party policy. It went through a conference. It went through a conference.
It's a very funny policy. Isn't it a very funny policy in which the leader of the Labour Party also disapproved of it? Corbyn was not in favour of it. In other words, it is perfectly clear, contrary to what is being said here, that this was Starmer's policy. He was in charge of it, he owned it, and he's lying about it. Because what is perfectly clear from everything that you... And by the way, you've left out the key things. It's quite extraordinary what you've left out. University fees.
We've only got an hour.
You've left out what is much the most important, which was his agreement to a complete programme of utility and railway nationalisation. Now, this raises real questions. Does he have any beliefs at all? Because if you agree to a programme like that, it means you're a thoroughgoing Corbyn-style socialist. Is that what he is, or is he just now hedging bets? Is it because circumstances have changed?
Well, I mean, circumstances have changed.
Hold on. Let's all agree that in 2020 the economy was in a very... When he signed that, this was pre-COVID and much more important, pre-Liz Truss being Prime Minister.
Don't be silly. To compare the effect of Liz and COVID means you're economically illiterate.
I am not economically illiterate.
Well, then you don't make the statement. Don't make the statement. Liz Truss's impact was a few billion. The impact of COVID was tens and hundreds of billions.
They are, but both of them. So what?
No, sorry. Can we just?
They are
they're completely different. And if you're
let's accept they're different. Let's accept they're different. Different
people
scale.
Paying mortgages, right?
They are a different scale, and interest rates going up anyway.
What I'm saying is that in 2020, when he signed that, when he said that, it was before COVID.
But it was his personal leadership manifesto, wasn't it? It was what he believed in.
It was what he believed in, and he now says it's not going to happen.
question.
But does he want to do it if things change back again? Is that still his aim?
Well,
is this
but you've completely failed to answer my question. If you believe in a full-scale programme of utility nationalisation, it means you're an old-style, big-state socialist. He is at the moment trying to sell himself as something digestible to Middle England, because he's flipped, as you said, this whole process of flip-flop. But I would like to go back to somewhere where you can't, even with your knowledge of economics, argue on the essential point, which is the business about friendship. Because this is where you can hold him to a direct lie. When he was standing as leader, he went out of his way to say quite specifically, can I remind you, that not simply was this man my colleague, he was my friend. Last week, what did he do? He reversed. He said he was only a colleague and he wasn't a friend. Now, would you like to explain that?
I mean, I think that his view of Jeremy Corbyn has changed massively.
Like everything else.
No, but I think Keir found himself in a very, very difficult position when he was Brexit secretary, when he was shadow Brexit secretary in the shadow cabinet, with a leader that he had to...
I think Scarlett's got a very fair point, that if you are in the cabinet or the shadow cabinet, you have to say the leader of the party is your friend, don't you? You can't...
Yeah.
That's just...
Sorry, are you... No, Jacob, you're elegant, you're elegant leaning over...
norm,
yes, you're elegant leaning over backwards. Was he compelled to stand for the shadow cabinet?
That's true.
Why did he have to be such a vocal supporter of Corbyn?
Because Cooper and some others held themselves aloof from the shadow cabinet.
No, he decided to go to the shadow cabinet because he thought he'd be useful.
Ambition did not enter into it. Sorry, Scarlett, isn't it perfectly clear?
I'm ever allowed to finish a sentence? Of course. Keir Starmer went into Parliament, right, after a very successful career, probably to become leader of the Labour Party, right? That's what he wanted to do. And, of course, you then go in and you do things.
But do you think when he supped with the devil he had a long enough spoon?
I think he did. I think he did. I mean, I certainly know from other members of the shadow cabinet that he fought pretty hard about anti-Semitism, which was one of the very difficult...
He didn't resign over it, and that's...
He didn't resign over it. Actually, nobody resigned over anti-Semitism. People so he and a lot of others resigned over Brexit, right? Because they felt that Jeremy Corbyn was partly to blame for the result of the Brexit referendum, and they resigned. He then went back. Quite a few of them went back.
But it's hard to believe, however strongly you're for or against Brexit, that Brexit is comparable with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is just something that is so wrong without any excuse that if you resign on Brexit but not on anti-Semitism, haven't you got your order of priorities wrong?
What I'm saying is nobody was resigning on anti-Semitism.
Lot didn't go back to serve him, though.
No, but that wasn't about anti-Semitism, Jacob. That was about
Gloria
Brexit.
De
That was about Brexit.
Piero left over anti-Semitism.
And what?
Gloria De Piero left over anti-Semitism. She wouldn't serve him.
So, but at the time, anti-Semitism actually had barely raised its head. It was the day after, the Sunday after the Brexit referendum. There was mass resignation. Some people went back and others didn't.
OK. Well, thank you to my panel for that. Remember, we want to hear your thoughts. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up, I can confirm that one of the runners and riders for the next London mayoral election has vowed to put a complete end to Sadiq Khan's useless ULEZ scheme. And don't forget, an old foe who doesn't appreciate PG Woodhouse, of all things, joins me live in the studio amidst a careless council controversy in Glasgow.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Bert says, in all honesty, both the Conservatives and Labour Party say they're going to do one thing and then do the other. I'm sick to death of both the main parties. I'm sorry to hear that, Bert. Andrea, to be fair, Jacob, the Conservative Party also said many things in its 2019 manifesto, most, if not many of which, it's rowed back on. Oh dear. Well, the London mayoral elections are not set to take place until May next year, but the competition has already begun to hot up. Over the last few weeks, a number of my fellow Conservative MPs have stepped up to the wicket, vowing to end Khan's plans for a 3rd term and his 8 years as Mayor of London. It was predicted months ago that ULEZ would be Khan's biggest downfall, and his plans for expansion would be a target for new mayoral candidates. Analysts have predicted that ULEZ has a disproportionate effect on pregnant women, the disabled and those on lower incomes. Over the last few weeks, candidates have been pledging to scrap Khan's clean air zones and its controversial £12.50 charge that affects over 1.2 million vehicles in London and, as of August, Greater London. Well, Vox Populi, Vox Dei. We asked the people, would you vote for Sadiq Khan in the 2024 mayoral elections? And the people have spoken.
Probably because I'm a standard Labour voter, but I haven't totally made up my mind yet.
I don't think he's the right man for the job. I don't think he's done anything for Londoners.
If I'm going to vote, I will vote for him, yes.
No one wants a ULEZ zone, only he does. Everybody's complained, but that's not very important to him because his name is Khan.
So he hasn't done that bad of a job. Don't know if I'll actually vote for him yet, because I'm still undecided. It depends on all the candidates, what they actually offer and bring to the table.
With me now is Howard Cox, one of the mayoral candidates, who promises that he will stop ULEZ in its tracks, unlike his opponents. Howard, regrettably, you're not standing as a Conservative candidate.
Jacob, it's with a heavy heart that I've said that. I've got no choice. It's been 13 years campaigning, as you know, and we've had that wonderful fuel duty freeze in that time, and I've got to thank the Conservatives for that. But unfortunately, the Conservatives aren't doing enough for me. And the Reform UK party approached me, we discussed it, and we looked at the policies, and I matched them up with our supporters. And I've got 1.7 million supporters. And when we asked them the question, what do they want? I'm afraid the Conservatives didn't agree with them.
And what are you going to do about ULEZ?
Well, I'm the only candidate saying to scrap ULEZ, all of it, not just the extension to the into Greater London. It's pointless. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I actually commissioned a report from the CEBR to actually what is the cost of ULEZ to the economy, to the GDP of London. And to cut a huge story short, nearly £1 billion a year it's costing the economy.
How does that £1 billion break down? What effect is it having on businesses? What businesses is it stopping?
It's mainly small businesses. It's mainly the sole traders, the electricians, the plumbers, those sorts of things, and low-income families. And when it's taken into account, and we've only looked at the direct effects on these particular demographics, what we're seeing actually, if you actually analyse the indirect effects, it's something like 4 times more. It could be something like up to £4 billion it's costing.
And have you done any work on how much of the air quality deterioration is caused by self-inflicted congestion? Because I was driving here this afternoon along Park Lane. Park Lane used to be a very clear road going north. It's now down to 1 lane for cars. They've got a bus lane and a cycle lane, even though there's one in the park already. It creates terrible congestion and therefore fumes. Has any work been done on what effect this is happening?
Yes, it has been done. I mean, there's been monitoring processes, these monitors going around various places where in low traffic neighbourhoods and in terms of cycle lanes, where the traffic has been rediverted, that sort of thing, and they're finding more pollution and congestion issues in those areas. The big thing about this, and this is the Transport of London's own report, that the expansion to the M25, the Greater London, for ULEZ will not have any demonstrable effect on the air quality we breathe.
No, because that's where there's less congestion anyway, and the real problem is in central London, and that's been made worse by narrowing the roads. So will you widen the roads again? Will you give us back our car space?
Yes, I will do. I'm going to get rid of LTNs, and cycle lanes will be reduced to what they were before, which was about 1 metre, rather than the size of a bus lane.
1 metre? Is that a yard and a bit?
Yes, I'm sorry about
You're
that,
getting very modern. I'm not sure that's right for the Reform Party. And what about speed limits? The 20-mile-an-hour speed limits? I felt very sorry for the Archbishop of Canterbury. Getting a speeding ticket for 25 miles an hour, I mean, that's sort of slower than the cyclists.
Even I thought that as well, but yes, we're getting rid of 20-mile-an-hour zones as well. So it's getting rid of LTNs, getting rid of the whole of ULEZ and getting rid of 20-mile-an-hour zones. And actually, the cycle lanes themselves are going back during the tenure of Sadiq Khan. All of the lanes he's put in place in terms of cycle lanes, they will be taken back.
So we'll be back to where we were in the glory years of Boris Johnson.
Well, yeah, but basically because when traffic was moving and we didn't have this sort of congestion.
And what other policies have you got that you will be presenting to the electorate? Because the motorist is a very important dynamic within any election, but you must want to appeal to others as well.
Absolutely right. One of the things, of course, that we saw about knife crime statistics came out today. What we're talking about is, I understand there's only about 5 to 10% at any one time police are actually on the beat. We want to triple the number of bobbies on the beat. And we don't think that's going to cost us a ridiculous amount of money. We're just simply going to get them out of their desks, from behind their desks, and put them on the street. That's a very popular...
Haven't people been saying that for years?
Yes.
Going back to Willie Whitelaw being Home Secretary.
Well, that's going back indeed. I will do this. This is what
Why will you do it when everyone else has promised it and they haven't?
Well, I'm going to do my darndest, and I won't stand up for anyone that actually is fighting that particular objective. And the other thing, of course, is social housing. The sort of thing, Sadiq Khan's missed all of the targets in terms of actually getting... I have a particular interest in this. I've got a daughter who's 31 years of age who actually earns about £40,000 a year, but she can't afford... She lives in London, she can't afford to touch the sides in terms of getting a property. So we'll remove some of the planning problems, the planning issues, the obstacles that we keep hearing about. Those are the 3 big issues I'm talking about. But little things like 5G, for example, is patchy in Greater London. I will incentivise our mobile delivery networks to actually make 5G actually work.
And in terms of planning, what will you do about the green belt? Because there's a lot of brownfield land in the green belt, and Keir Starmer's been talking about that being made available for development. Are you in favour of that, or do you want planning to be in existing areas?
In existing areas, particularly brownfield sites. That's what. But
brownfield sites in the green belt, because they currently count as green belt. How would you view that?
Well, I've got to look into the detail about the green. I do not want to build on the green belt. It's as simple as that, Jacob. I don't think it's necessary. There's a lot of spaces, and we can build up a bit more as well.
Oh, do you want to build up?
Yes.
Do you want tower blocks? Because tower blocks have tended to be unpopular. So when you say build up, what do you mean? I
don't mean the 35-storey block. We're talking about 6 or 7 floors, those sorts of levels.
Talking the sort of mansion blocks that were very popular, that the Victorians built, and actually created very high urban density in an environment that people liked, a very successful planning model.
Absolutely right, and that's the sort of thing. But the important thing is we've got to get our London motoring again, moving again, and all these sorts of things, the economy moving again, and housing better for people, and above all, crime down. We've got to cut crime. So what we're talking about is we're going to absolutely scrap ULEZ, cut crime and ditch Khan.
Well, people need to feel safe in London, so dealing with crime is going to be important. What about homelessness in London? How are you going to tackle that? Because that has become a problem in more recent years.
Yes, it has indeed, and we've got to get to the bottom of that. How big that's become is very much down to Sadiq Khan. Not actually, he's taken all of his political eyes off the ball for his own personal ego, and that's the thing that I'm hearing from all supporters in London, that we need to get back to common sense policies, and we haven't got those.
Well, I hope one day Mr. Khan will come on and defend his record on GB News. He has an open invitation from me. But in the meantime, thank you, Howard. Coming up after the intermission, some people are a little bit obese, and this is costing the NHS a fortune. But is it the government's job to tell us what to eat? And now discrimination is apparently positive. I'll be debating this later with someone who thinks it's the best thing since sliced bread.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely
Right.
stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Dawn has kindly sent in a message saying Sadiq Khan should not have been allowed to waste the money installing all the ULEZ cameras, but he was allowed. In capital letters, absolute waste. Hear, hear. Thank you, Dawn. A chorus of approval for Dawn. Luciano Pavarotti, the famous opera singer, once said the reason fat people are happy is that the nerves are well protected. But a new report presented at the European Congress on Obesity has suggested that obese Britons cost the NHS roughly £14 billion a year, with 2 in 3 British adults being overweight or obese. A director of the Obesity Health Alliance said the government is forcing the NHS to pay for its years of failure to prevent obesity-related ill health. But is this true? Obesity is caused by personal decisions. The government doesn't force people to go to McDonald's. Other burger chains are available. If anything, the government has tried to disincentivise people from going to McDonald's. We already have the sugar tax, and the government has in place plans to ban offers such as buy one, get one free on items high in sugar and salt this summer. In other words, making food more expensive for those on lower incomes. Well, my panel is still with me, but before that, I'm going to the former host of Fat Families, Steve Miller. Steve, is it the job of the government to tell us to eat less?
No, I'm fed up to the back teeth of the government health education. We have had significant amount of it over the years. And if people want to know exactly what to eat, Jacob, all they do is they go on the old internet and type in, what do I eat to be slimmer? And they'll get millions of results. I think we have got a desperate situation now with obesity. And the biggest reason for that, Jacob, is we've normalised it. We've made it cool to be fat. You know, love your curves and all of this sort of thing. So what does that mean on a practical level? The government needs to do, if anything, is to get braver, to get bolder, to be more direct, and to create a culture where being fat is wrong, and to, at the same time, yes, to support people, of course, but the vast majority of people, based on my experience, they know what they should be putting in their mouths to slim down. What we need to do is absolutely be much more to the point, get rid of this wokey nonsense, because, you know, all of this fat acceptance tripe, that just encourages our kids to actually build themselves up and be gloriously fat. We have to put our foot down a bit.
All right, but with smoking, an element of it's been social pressure, that smoking is no longer fashionable, it's no longer cool, but a lot of it's done by high taxation, regulation and bans, and that has increased the life expectancy of most sections of society. If that could be done with smoking through pretty bossy action, is there a lesson for that in food, and should the government, in fact, do more?
No, I don't want people taxed. Why should the responsible have to pay more for their grub than the other? No, it's not about that. However, you do raise a very important point, which is the smoking bit. Now, there is absolute evidence that graphics and down-to-earth warning signs on cigarette packets helped people to quit the habit. So what does that mean for obesity? What that means for obesity is we're more blunt about it. We do have warning signs that say things such as, if you are fat, think before ordering. If you are too fat, you're putting yourself on death row. And that's the sort of ballsiness that I want to see from this government.
Wasn't it price and bans that made the bigger difference than unpleasant pictures? Once you couldn't smoke in bars and in pubs, you couldn't smoke with your friends, and it cost you £15 a packet, smoking collapsed. It's price and bans that work.
Listen. We can wrap this up how we want. It's got to be multifaceted. Of course it has. But what we do have to do is get a bit more down to earth about it, like the Japanese do, potentially including the employers as well, like they do in Japan. Do you know what Japan's obesity rate is? It's around 5%.
Yeah, well, Rishi Sunak's there, so he can report back to us on the obesity in Japan when he returns home. Thank you, Steve. With me is my brilliant panel, Dr. David Starkey and the former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire. Scarlett, I may be paraphrasing Steve, but he was basically saying we should just be rude to fat people. Do you think that is a reasonable government policy?
I don't think that helps. I mean, if losing weight was easy, right, not only would I be a stone lighter, but I mean, the slimming industry would not make millions and millions. Losing weight is incredibly difficult. And that's for people like me who are just a bit overweight and have a slight problem with chocolate, right? But actually, I mean, seriously, when we're talking about obesity and it is costing this country... masses. I mean, what the NHS, we pay our taxes. I'm not talking, actually, the things that work. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's putting it up. But actually, it's saying to the manufacturers, it's saying to the food people, OK, use less sugar. Just put less sugar in things. Cadbury's are actually interestingly talking about it, right?
Yes. David, I find this very difficult because tax and regulation works. But on the other hand, I believe in a free society and people are allowed to make bad choices for themselves. If you look at alcohol, every time the UK, England particularly, has had an alcohol problem, the government has intervened, going back to the 18th century, with higher taxes and more detailed regulation.
And it doesn't alter behaviour at all.
Is that the point? But gin alley stopped and...
It doesn't alter behaviour at all.
Drinking and driving.
Drinking and driving, it did. No, drinking and driving, it did. But let's go back and actually... stop all sort of doing argy-bargy and look at the historical basis of all of this. We are the first country to experience an industrialised diet right from the 19th century. In other words, the processed food of Bisto, of Gentleman's Red, all sorts of things, very adulterated flour and so on because of early industrialisation, and also the destruction of a peasant culture. We have no genuine native cuisine. I'm a foodie. That really is the case. And it is against this, which is also true of America, which is why the Anglo-Saxon world is particularly prone to obesity. Whereas in France, Italy, Germany, which have industrialised very, very recently, there remains a tradition of peasant eating with real food. I've just moved house in London to Bloomsbury, and I went to my local, because it's just the nearest place, my local Sainsbury's, whatever it's called, Sainsbury's Local. I couldn't believe what was on the shelves. There was hardly a piece of fruit. There was hardly a vegetable. There was no unprocessed meat. And everybody there, again, speaking very frankly, the tills that required a credit card were totally unused. Everybody was paying cash, and dare one say they were you can always tell when people are relatively poor as to how they're dressed, the fact they're fat, and whatever. And it was like stepping into a different world.
So, Scarlett, how much?
In other words,
government
there is something. We should call things by their proper names. The problem with obesity is primarily a class problem. It's overwhelmingly a class problem. That the poorer you are, the fatter you are.
Well, because the processed food is the cheapest food.
That's exactly right.
Yes, and you give it to your children because you know that they will eat it. I mean, there is a real problem. McDonald's, for instance, as you say, there are others, but say McDonald's is dead cheap. So you take your children out to McDonald's, you can do a meal which is really cheap. Therefore, they go out, and that's the beginning of it. So actually, what we need to talk about is it's talking with the food manufacturers, right? Is that is...
Or persuading people not to buy manufactured food. I mean, this is...
But that's impossible to do.
Absolutely.
No, I mean, the reason why obesity has developed is manufactured food. It is completely straightforward. It is very difficult to get fat if you eat non-processed food.
Yes, I understand that, but you can't go back to a society where people are spending hours preparing their food, and the manufactured
food... It's not hours
food
preparing.
is ready in minutes.
It really is not hours preparing food. That is. I cook. I don't know whether you do.
No, I don't.
There you are, you see. And again, it's also the problem, of course, with working women, that the whole sorry.
Obviously always our fault.
No, it's not. No, it's not your fault. What I'm trying to say is, can we be rational and think why this problem is so difficult to solve?
But
that's what I'm trying to say.
How much right does the government have to be prescriptive?
Well, the government has quite a lot of right because obesity is so dangerous. There's no question about it, that you get diabetes much earlier, that you're more likely to have hip and knee replacements, that everything goes wrong, heart attacks, that it is costing the NHS an awful lot of money. I mean, a young GP said to me when he was a junior doctor, he said, well, you know, if you got rid of old people and fat people, you'd have barely anybody in hospital, right?
Well, you wouldn't have much of a population, but
so actually, you know, as long as we have the NHS, so it is costing the taxpayer a fortune. So,
but that's a very difficult argument. We can't run our lives to the benefit of the
Jacob,
NHS.
it is the central argument.
But we can't run our lives to the benefit of the NHS.
No, I'm sorry, we do. And if you look at the scale of the NHS in terms of our budget, I'm sorry, this is increasingly the case. We are becoming a state that Jacob, sorry, this really does matter.
I know, but that's another discussion. We may want to get into another occasion. So I want to focus on this issue.
So I do think that, therefore, the government, like with smoking, has to do something that works. And what we know doesn't work is lecturing people about changing their eating habits, right? And saying to people, you're fat. It just doesn't work.
OK, I'm going to give you the last word. Isn't the difficulty that the pain of this initially falls on the poorest, because they're the ones who are the most dependent on cheap processed food?
No, because what I was talking about is levies, is actually going to food manufacturers and saying, you've got to do better. You've got to lower your fat content. You've got to lower your sugar content. And actually, it really works, because the last thing the food manufacturers want is to have to pay extra money. So that's the way of doing it without it being on the poor.
Well, as long as I can keep on getting a Cadbury's cream egg from time to time, I will be happy. But thank you to my panel. Coming up, is there such a thing as positive discrimination? Or is all discrimination negative? Well, the debate is happening here on State of the Nation after these messages from our sponsors.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel. Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Sandra, I have watched your programme from the beginning. You are a natural broadcaster, so polite and a gentleman. Thank you, Sandra. Really appreciate the Latin as a fellow Catholic. Please keep up the good work. Well, that's my opportunity to mention that today is, of course, the Feast of the Ascension, and I was very lucky. I went to Mass at the Brompton Oratory at 8 o'clock this morning in the Old Rite, which is entirely in Latin, so all very properly done, and it's a very important feast day, as all Catholics and many others, indeed, many other Christians who are watching tonight will know. And Anna, thank you, Anna, this is very much appreciated. Hello, team, you're complete geniuses. The Starmer Skegness visual is simply brilliant. It's a pity you can't sell it as merch. Well, my brilliant team managed to do this and produce a poster that I think would normally get people to go to Skegness, but instead is illustrating the flip-floppery of Sir Keir. So thank you for that. Glasgow City Council has made headlines after it, quote, accidentally posted a job advert specifically for non-whites in which what they're calling an administration error. They said to us earlier, it's not a mistake, it's an administration error. Now, tell me what the difference is, and you win a prize. Coconut, I'm not sure what, but some prize. Now, in line with the Equality Act of 2010, Glasgow City Council has stuck to the rules and are in fact levelling the playing field through positive action. The council is actually allowing extra help for groups of people with a shared protected characteristic, such as race, sex or sexual orientation. How thoughtful of them. Well, we contacted Glasgow City Council for comment, and they responded, we have committed to increasing the representation of BME people in our workforce. This is in our equality outcomes, to ensure we better represent the makeup of the city and to support the Scottish Government's A Fairer Scotland for All anti-racist employment strategy. If you understood any of that bureaucratic gobbledygook, you should also win a prize, perhaps another cream egg if we can get any out of season. But I'm delighted to be joined now by the social commentator Narinder Kaur. Narinder, isn't all discrimination unfair?
Yes, it is, and we must always fight discrimination. We all know that. However, there is such a thing as, I don't like the word positive discrimination. I prefer, as you said, positive action. Because actually, in terms of job searches, it is just a search to ensure equality and fairness and representation. And yes, it does matter. I think it hugely matters because Glasgow City Council have said that their positions, their promoted positions, are dominated by those who identify as white Scottish. And actually, the BAME employees have complained at Glasgow City Council that we're not considered for these jobs in promotion. That's not fair.
But isn't the problem much more nuanced than an issue of race? That there was a report, when it was a couple of years ago, that said one of the real difficulties was from white boys from poorer economic backgrounds, and that they keep on losing out, and that therefore when you pick on one particular characteristic, you're ignoring the nuance of it and discriminating very harshly against people who aren't in that particular segment of society.
No, but the Equality Act allows for positive action, not just for race. This isn't just about ethnic minorities. This is about
But that's what
sex
Glasgow City
discrimination.
Council
Just
really
this one, but if we keep it generalised, then actually women representation in politics. You've got so many more women MPs now, and actually that is because of Labour's. They did the women-only shortlist. Was that not discrimination against men?
Oh, well,
Right.
and the Labour
So
Party...
how was that allowed?
Well, the Labour Party then elected some men from all the women shortlists, which was a turn-up for the books. It was allowed because it was exempt. There was an exemption for party political
Well, there you
action.
go, because we did need more women representation. So if Glasgow City Council, and this is an
But
education...
is the right way to do it through discrimination, or doesn't that just create tension within society when the people you've discriminated against feel that's unfair, that if you take somebody...
OK, let's swap this around. If you've had the advantages of life of going to Eton and your chances of getting into Oxford University are so much higher than the white male from a Sheffield working-class background, how do we ensure fairness there?
Well, surely the issue there is with improving standards in schools, which Michael Gove did a brilliant job at, which is why we now see that the UK is heading towards the top of the league tables for reading, and that the Academy scheme has been a fantastic success in raising standards.
Yes, but that...
You don't improve the options of people throughout society by cutting down the tall poppies. You do it by raising the standards for those who aren't being properly educated.
Well, that's you. But society does discriminate, and actually, that's ensuring that employers and managers don't have unconscious bias when they have a candidate who have equal merit. Because I know this argument goes around about equal merit, but when you've got a black person or a white person and they're of equal merit, how do we know the manager won't use unconscious bias? And we know from every ethnic minority study and survey done for years and years and years that we are discriminated against.
But that sort of discrimination is illegal, and quite rightly so.
Yes.
But shouldn't it also be illegal the other way around, that Glasgow City Council shouldn't be able to discriminate against white Scottish people?
Well, then how do they create diversity in the workplace? Metropolitan police are desperate to create diversity in the workplace.
Because people from other backgrounds will be just as able and better than many of the applicants who are white and Scottish.
That's not true. That actually isn't true at all, actually, because a lot of people from BAME communities are often overqualified.
There you go, so they should be getting the jobs.
Overqualified. But they're not. They're getting... Their CVs are not being looked at. That's a fact, Jacob.
That absolutely shouldn't be discrimination.
But they are.
But what you're saying is positive discrimination, because otherwise these people wouldn't get the jobs, but they would get them if there weren't discrimination.
But there is discrimination. But there is discrimination. Hence why we've got the Equality Act, because there is discrimination.
But that's what the Equality Act does, is it stops discrimination.
But it doesn't.
Makes it illegal.
But it actually doesn't.
Well, as far as one can tell from the evidence, and that very important report that I think came out 2 years ago showed that we had very little discrimination in this country. We've been very successful.
What report is that?
This was a report commissioned by the government.
There still isn't. We are still not achieving every single report and survey. We are not achieving the standards that are needed, and ethnic minorities are discriminated. We are discriminated against.
On what basis? What evidence is there?
Pay gap. There's gender pay gap. There's gender imbalance. This isn't just about race.
Yeah,
this is
the
about...
Sewell report was the report I was talking about.
Right.
I'm sure you remember.
OK. And that doesn't... There's other reports...
Which showed that it was the white working-class boys who were the ones who were most likely to be losing out.
Of course, in university places and elite universities. How are we ensuring that is better then?
Well,
we're not.
What we've got to do is to improve education and to give people a fair chance.
Why not have positive action? Let's change the word. Language is important. Let's change discrimination to action.
Language is indeed important.
Very important.
But if you call discrimination action, that doesn't stop it being discriminatory.
But this is action. We need positive action to ensure
that favours
fairness.
one group against another. But doesn't that just cause tensions between one group and another and make the harmony within society worse?
No, because this is the Equality Act, Section 159, does allow, it's legal to allow positive action to ensure fairness against those groups who aren't being looked at fairly. They're not represented.
Well, we're going to have to draw the conversation to a conclusion there. I think positive discrimination is wrong and unfair, and I also disagree with Narinda about PG Woodhouse, but that was last time. That's all from me. Up next, the mighty Dan Wootton. What
Jacob,
is on your bill
fascinating
of fare?
discussion. I think I'm going to have to buy my friend Narinda a framed copy of the Sewage report because she would learn a lot. We're a great country and we're not at all institutionally racist. But coming up, the brilliant Samantha Markle on exactly what went down in New York and this unravelling story when it comes to the Harry and Meghan car chase.
Well, that sounds extremely exciting. I hope you've got some pictures of the car chase. If not, look at American films over the decades. They always have car chases or James Bond films. Nonetheless, that's all from me. The weather is coming up in a moment. I'll be back on Monday at 8 o'clock. This has been State of the Nation, and you, dear viewer, have been Moggalicious, and it's definitely sunny in Somerset.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with your GB News forecast. Clouds sinking south over the next 24 hours, bringing with it some light rain. But then as temperatures rise during Friday, it will also bring some heavy showers across southern parts of the UK. It's all courtesy of a weather front. That weather front's been bringing thicker cloud to Scotland and Northern Ireland through the day and some outbreaks of rain. As it sinks into a large area of high pressure across England and Wales, it does weaken. And so by the time we get to midnight, the rain clearing Scotland and Northern Ireland, clear spells here, 1 or 2 showers in the far northwest. Then the rain pushes into Northern England and North Wales. Really, it's just outbreaks of mostly light rain at this stage, but a lot more cloud for England and Wales, and as a result, temperatures mainly dipping to 8 to 11 Celsius, although in some clear spots in the far south, a little bit colder, and certainly a colder night to come for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Bright skies here as we start off Friday. Some cloud will build through the day, but it's going to be mostly dry. A different story for much of England and Wales. We've got rain sinking south, then as temperatures rise up to 19, 20 Celsius by the afternoon, some heavy showers will emerge, especially through the Midlands into central southern England, the southwest and South Wales. These will be quite sharp where they do occur and could even be some thunderstorms about. They'll be slow moving, and so in a few spots the risk of some impacts, but actually for many they fade away then into the evening. And by the early hours of Saturday we're left with clear spells across England and Wales and temperatures into the mid or high single figures. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, a milder night to come because of the additional cloud that comes in from the Atlantic once again. And this is a weak weather front once more, so we're going to see outbreaks of mostly light rain across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Things do brighten up into the afternoon for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Some bright spells start to come through, but for England and Wales, really, that's where the finest conditions will be through the weekend. Plenty of warm, sunny spells.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
The Dubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on G.